Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Boomerang Labs' April webinar. Can't believe it's already April of 2023. We run these monthly webinars as a great way to bring in some of our favourite contacts in the circular economy world and talk about some of these topics that we know are front of mind for you anyway, and give you the chance to connect with the experts in their field. So today we're really excited to talk about Australia's returns economy and talk about how we can capture all the good in our resources. So we're joined by Alison Covington from Good 360 Australia, as well as Jo Taranto from Good for the Hood. So we're in the room with minds that know lots about this space. So really looking forward to having that conversation towards the end after we have our presentations. Often when we're talking about circular economy, it's framing through the economic lens, as you would assume. When we're talking about shifting from that business as usual to a circular lens and justifying it through, lens of productivity, efficiency, profit, and so forth. But today we want to talk a little bit more about how these economic values are inherently connected to social and community values and how we can get a lot of great value from engaging the community throughout this transition away from business as usual. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the various lands on which we are all working and living today. For me, I'm in the Hunter Valley, so that's the Wonnarua and Awabakal people. But we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging across the various lands, across all the states and territories. So a little bit of a quick shameless plug for us in case this is your first interaction with Boomerang Labs, and if this is your third webinar, I apologise for hearing this every single month. But we're Australia's first circular economy accelerator. So our mission is to support circular economy entrepreneurs and solution seekers to grow their businesses from a small business idea or dream into a scalable and commercialised venture. So we provide support for all stages of the startup journey. Straight after today, we'll be ending our 6th week of our Basecamp program for soon-to-be founders, but we also hold programs for early stage and late stage startups as well. Save the date. Again, we have these webinars every single month, so keep it in your calendar and I'll be sending through some information about next webinar when we send you the recording from today's session. So excited to hand over to Alison right now from Good 360 Australia. You'll get a more thorough explanation from Alison, but they're Australia's largest online marketplace for spare goods for businesses to donate. So to date, they've supported more than 3,500 schools and charities, working directly with retail and business partners to rehome goods for people in need. So thanks, Alison. I'll hand to you and I'll get to sharing your screen now.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be invited into the Boomerang family. I'm so excited to be able to tell you more about the Good 360 journey. When I started Good 360, it's almost 10 years ago now, the circular economy wasn't a term that was really spoken about. So to hear it's so prevalent now in our vernacular, it's just really, really exciting. So before I go on to my presentation, I'd just like to play a short video that we would really explain a little bit about Good 360. So if you could play that video for me, that would be great. And then I'll get into our presentation.
Good 360's mission is to help people and the planet by reducing need and waste in our communities at the same time. Good 360 does this by connecting people in need, charities and disadvantaged schools with businesses willing to donate unsold or surplus goods and services. So everyone benefits. Charities and disadvantaged schools simply register for free membership on our website and order the brand new goods that they need for their community, ensuring the right goods get to the right people at the right time. This in turn creates a circle of good that enables businesses, communities and government, schools and charities, people in crisis, society, our planet, and all of us to benefit in more ways than one. So join the Good 360 Circle of Good and help us reduce need and waste in our communities at the same time. It's good for everyone.
Thank you so much. If we just move to the next slide. I don't know if anyone had a chance to hear the voice that was behind that video. Sorry, just to the next slide. You don't need to see my face. Thank you. So the video brand explainer was actually voiced by Sam Neill. So we feel as a small charity, we're less than 30 people, to have Sam voice our brand explainer was just so exciting for us. That he was also passionate about people and planet was just a really step forward for us as a charity. We're less than 10 years old, and that he backed our cause was just very exciting. And we've got a few more things happening this year, but that's very exciting. So a little bit about our journey and what we do in terms of the circular economy. I started Good 360 in 2012 just by accident, because I read about Good 360 operating in the US, and at that time they had been operating for more than 30 years, and they had been connecting businesses' brand new goods to charities and schools, and at that time they had connected more than $7 billion worth of goods. And these were spare and excess goods and returns that they were matching that wasn't food. And I thought about that and thought, isn't that extraordinary that in another part of the world, these goods were being connected? And what I looked at around Australia, we were fantastic at connecting food waste. And I thought, who's doing that in Australia? And when I sort of mapped that out, I couldn't find anybody doing it in Australia. So I reached out to them to sort of talk about how could we do that here in Australia. And so, long story short, I started that in 2015. And here we are now talking about, the ways that we could get those goods connected to Australians. And, we have a lot of vulnerable Australians, but I just couldn't understand why the US had been doing it for more than 30 years and we hadn't, and that food waste had been done and done very well by, significantly good charities here in Australia. We have Food Bank, we have Oz Harvest, we have Second Bite, and they were doing that at scale, but we hadn't been doing it with all those other fantastic goods. And if we can go to the next slide, we can have a look at the impact that by starting Good 360 back in 2015 and to now, we have been able to make some inroads in being able to collect those goods. And what does that look like in the circular economy? We've been able to collect clothing and PPE and toiletries, all these fantastic goods. And in that small amount of time, we've been able to match up over $300 million worth of goods. And that's over 30 million items that we've been able to box up and deliver to over, as we said at the beginning, over 3,500 charities and schools. So if we hadn't started, all these vulnerable Australians wouldn't have been able to have access to that. And that's a national footprint all across Australia. And I think that's so important. And back to the story of, Good 360 had been doing that in the US for more than 30 years. It makes us wonder, what had been happening to all those goods here in Australia. And that's why I started it, because I was just so curious about what was happening. And the more we talked to these businesses, what was happening was that it was going to landfill, or it was being wasted, and it was sitting idle. And the reason for that was that nobody was asking them if they could provide a solution for that. And I think that's the problem, is that businesses, and we talk about that more today, more than 10 years ago when I first started it, businesses actually do want to do good, but nobody provided them with a solution. People provided businesses with a solution around food waste, but there wasn't a solution around these non-food goods. So I think, that's the important reason about why we started. And, if we can go to the next slide, we can talk about the problem. So the problem that we have is, and this is the way we articulate it, is we live in a world of plenty, yet millions of people find themselves in need every day. At Good 360, we know there's more than enough to go around, and that's why we work to get donated goods to where they're needed most. And I think that's just a really simple thing to think about, is that we know that lots of goods are produced by businesses and that we use Earth's resources to produce these goods, but often they don't get used. So what we want to think about is, why did we use Earth's resource, but then we didn't use them? But on the other side, we have millions of people that are in need. And that's where we, and lots of players, and perhaps people here on this call today, are looking for ways to actually get these goods into the hands and have a longer life for these goods. And think of the benefit that we can have. And, you know, every day in the media, we're talking about cost of living crisis. And if it's not cost of living crisis, we're talking about other natural disasters. And then we're talking about challenging times for people who have, you know, charities are working with people in domestic violence, youth homelessness, you know, all these areas. And what we think about is all these Earth's resources we used to make goods, but yet they're not being used. And there's a lot of effort being talked about to recycle goods. And what we're trying to get people to focus on is the amount of goods that were produced and never used. So if we go on to the next slide, please. We did some research with Deloitte's Access Economics, to see what was the size of the problem here in Australia. So the size of the problem is actually $2.5 billion worth of goods go to waste every year in Australia. And that, to me, just blew our minds, that $2.5 billion worth of goods sit idle, or worse still, go to landfill. But yet we know in Australia, 1 in 6 people live below the line of poverty. And so what if we match those goods up? It just seems that that's something that needs to happen before we look at goods that need to be recycled that have been used. And so that's where we're so incredibly passionate about, is getting people to use the goods first. But that's the piece of research that we did, was looking at goods that had actually been produced in terms of goods that were excess inventory. Now we're doing a piece of work to have a look at and say, well, what about the goods that made it to the consumer, and then the consumer said, well, we didn't actually want those goods. And that's what we call the returns market. And so that's even larger than the $2.5 billion that we scoped out in this piece of research. According to the US, with 360 in the US, in that market, the figure is, I want you to sit down when I tell you this, the figure in the US is $780 billion. And whilst we acknowledge that the US market is much bigger, we know that the Australian market is getting, you know, is large and growing every day. So if we add our $2.5 billion worth of excess goods, and then add proportionally, the US market is probably, you know, 10 times the size of Australia. If we, you know, reduce that 750 billion by 1/10, it's still a lot of product that needs to have a home that is being wasted. And so we're doing another piece of research to say, how big is that problem? And we need to address that problem as well. And imagine giving those products to Australians who are doing it really tough now. And we know we can't turn on the TV or read all the articles without understanding that cost of living is a real problem for all Australians at the moment. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So what is the opportunity for Good 360? So Good 360 is all about collaboration. So, you know, we want to work with our partners, and we talk about brands and retailers to say that they are very generous and they need a solution. So they want us to come to them and say, how could we actually help with these problems, or this opportunity as such? So what we're doing is gearing up to say that, you know, over the course of the last 7 years, or 7 or 8 years, we've been putting systems in place to be able to help these businesses. But also, you know, we need additional funding to be able to scale up and meet the opportunity as well. So when we talk about the $2.5 billion worth of goods that are available in the market, Good 360 has actually been addressing about 100 million of that. So, you know, 5% of that. So I constantly tell our team we're actually a bunch of underachievers. Whilst we do fantastic work, there's an opportunity to do so much more to help Australians. You know, we've been helping 3,500 charities and schools, which is enormous when you think about it. When, you know, we constantly ask our corporates, when they ask us to match them up to charities, how many charities or schools could you name? Most of them would get up to 50. So we said, we'll give you access to 3,500. So that's extraordinary, the work that we do. But registered in Australia, there's about 50,000 charities, and there's probably about 2,500 schools that would be eligible for working with us. So again, we're not helping as much as we need to help. So we need to scale, and, you know, like many businesses that are working with Boomerang, it's about scaling up to the market that's there to be able to do that. So the opportunity is so great. But what we do have is we have all the systems in place. So we have the technology and the logistics infrastructure in place, because we've been growing every year. You know, the first year we did $4 million, and then we did $20 million, and now we're up to $100 million. So we've been scaling and showing people we have the capabilities, so we can scale. And if you look at the international market, Good 360 was doing $300 million worth of goods when I first started talking to them each year. They're now doing $3 billion worth of goods a year, which is absolutely extraordinary if you think about how much they're assisting their communities. So the ability to scale is there. It's just being able to get the right funding to be able to scale and be able to assist the communities, but importantly, just as well, assist those businesses who have that excess and those returns to be able to facilitate to the vulnerable communities as well. So if we go to the next scale, please, the next slide, sorry. So how do we work? Just to explain the mechanism of how Good 360 facilitates those returns back into the system and facilitate those excess, businesses are donate their goods to Good 360, and we're Australia-wide. And we make it really simple for not-for-profits to be able to access those goods. So we have an online marketplace. As it said at the beginning, we're the largest online marketplace for charities to be able to access our goods. So if you think about eBay for charities, they can access our goods 24/7, which is incredibly important if you think about charities who are working in disasters. So in a disaster, often charities are given things that they don't actually want. So this is an ability for charities to search for the goods that they want in the quantity they want. So right goods to the right people at the right time is really, really important. People's good intentions actually do more harm than good. So charities being able to source what they need for their communities is incredibly important. And so we don't want those excess and returns goods actually ending up being another wave of disaster and going back to landfill. And statistics show in disasters, 60% of goods that are donated in disasters actually end up in landfill because they were never requested. Because people go, oh, I'll collect all these goods in my community or my church or my school and send them to a disaster. But they never ask the disaster community, did they need them? So our system allows those communities to ask for what they're needed. So we connect the goods that businesses want to the charities who want them. And then importantly, we have a system to make sure that environmentally, we make sure that they're connected with the less environmental kilometres possible. So I think it's really important when you're talking about returns and excess that they're matched into local communities or they travel the least distance possible. So if we've got businesses who have excess at store, so we work with Big W and we've been able to match their 180 stores and been able to facilitate around 7 million items to local communities without moving those items around the country. And so that sort of program is really important, is that we send local charities and schools to those stores. We don't bring them back to our RDC, our redistribution centre. We match them at a local level. What comes back to our redistribution centre are things that are not fit for purpose in the quantities that businesses and charities have them. So we only bring back to our national distribution centre what we have to repack and then send back out around the community, because it's just not the right size that the charities need them in. So we have to change the quantity. And then we also have a system that businesses all around the country have their warehouses and we drop ship from their warehouses. So we use the spare infrastructure all around the country to send directly to our charities. So we also using spare and excess infrastructure all around the country rather than pay for new infrastructure in the country. So we're not asking for funding to say, hey, we have to set up more warehouses, more stores around the country. We're using what exists to reduce the cost of infrastructure, but also reduce the environmental kilometres. So if you think about a circular economy and returns, we're trying to reduce environmental footprint as well as cost. And so that's what we have built over the last 7 years so that we can scale and get to those billions of dollars of products. And so the benefit of that actually saves our charities time and money so that they can use the money that they're funded to have greater impact in their local communities. And so we say it's a win-win-win for everybody. It's such a win for the businesses, their teams and their customers love what they do when they promote it. And obviously our charities and our communities benefit by us all working together and finding a direct solution that helps everyone. And we use our technology to make sure that there's the least environmental footprint as possible. So if we can go to the next slide. And so that talks about the types of giving solutions we have. So again, it comes onto our website. So we've invested heavily, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into our technology that drives this. And so if you go onto our website, I welcome you to go onto our website. You can see it's a fantastic user experience for the charity. You won't be able to log in yourself. It's only vetted charities that can do that, but they have a really beautiful experience because we believe in hope and dignity for our charities. It's not looking like second-class product. They see it in a beautiful way because we want them to get clothing that they want for their communities, toys that they want for their communities. It's not about getting something that's for a second-class citizen. It's about showing them that they're equal to everybody else. And then they get it in the quantities they want. So we can give it to them in a carton, a pallet, or even a truckload. So it suits the size of the organisation that we're dealing with. And as I spoke to, it's about that local store connect. You can see that the Big W staff or any of the local store partners around the country, they love working with their local charity, their local school, and they feel that absolutely beautiful connection with their local community. And then we're involved heavily in disasters. We started in drought, flood, fire, COVID, cyclone, mouse plague, you name it, we've been there and we've stand with the communities and we stand with them on day one and we're still there many months and years later, which is really, really important to make sure communities know that. And that's why excess product and return product is so important because businesses will have demonstration stock, they'll have floor stock, they'll have all types of stock that we can actually match into communities. So we can use product that's what we call SLOB, slow moving stock that's available from the warehouse through to demonstrator stock. We work with fantastic partners like King Living and Harvey Norman, and imagine getting a beautiful King Living lounge when you've lost your home in a flood and you get that quality of a brand new lounge versus somebody donating their secondhand lounge. So I think it's really important to be able to see that sort of quality of program and giving that solution to excess and return product to somebody who really values receiving something so beautiful. So that's my last slide. So I know at the end of this talk, we'll have some Q&A, and I'm absolutely honoured to be able to talk to you about our place in the circular economy, and my contact details are there today if anybody wants to reach out to me. I know being an entrepreneur is, a roller coaster ride. So if anybody's on that journey, I'm really happy to talk to you about how I can help you on that journey as well.
Thanks so much, Alison. That was great. And just on time, you did perfectly with your timekeeping.
Thank
You were asking about that. Just want to reiterate to everyone to ask questions. We have a chat box at the bottom of the screen for you. Add in your questions as you go, and we have some time at the end where we'll bounce the questions between Alison and Jo and have a bit of a chat that way. But yeah, chuck them in a bit early so we make sure that we can get through as many as we'd like. I'll pass to Jo now. Thanks for joining, Jo. She is a sustainability speaker, educator, and founder of Good 360, which is not Good 360, Good for the Hood. There's too many goods. There's such an overlap. In terms of the name. But Jo is founder of Good for the Hood, which is a social enterprise consultancy, and she's doing fantastic work promoting sustainable and engaged communities. So thank you, Jo.
Thanks so much, Katie, and thank you, Alison, for sharing your good. We can never have too much good, Katie. What are you talking about? It is very popular, and I've got to that point where I'm starting to Google Good for the Hood, and I'm finding a lot of pop-ups of various products. I'm like, oh, there's another. So if you do have any trouble finding us, then let us know. Potential trademark dramas, but as entrepreneurs, you would know that is one of the risks. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you today. I will bring a slightly different lens, talking from the perspective of a citizen in the circular economy and advocating for what I believe will make life better for citizens, just like Alison's articulated, when we're designing solutions, products, businesses, new services, and what we need to keep at the forefront of our minds all the time so that we don't design a new system that's just as bad as the last, because wouldn't that be a disaster? As Katie mentioned, I'm Jo Taranto. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Wallamadigal land today in North Ryde, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the greatest circular economy of all time, not only our natural systems, but country and that connection between people, place and spirit, which we are hopefully going to return to in various ways through a circular economy. I am really excited that I became an entrepreneur. I'm absolutely an accidental social entrepreneur. I had a very conservative upbringing. I'm not going to community in the fact that, not that it was conservative, but I never knew that starting a business or starting a thing was a thing. It was never presented me as an option. I did a university degree. I went into a career and I was expected, well, it felt like I was expected to stay in that job forever. So at the ripe age of 30 something, after having my second child and finding myself staring at another 20 or 30 years in a career which had served me fairly well to that point, I just thought, what is this all about? And I was really having that exact feeling that I see in so many people in communities, that existential dread about climate change, that eco-anxiety, that sense that our models are just so broken and that we're just on the hamster wheel of consumption and emissions. And I just didn't know what to do about it. So I found myself doing a lot in my community because it felt like the easiest, simplest, and most pragmatic way for me to make a difference. And all of a sudden, I'd started a business with my neighbor. I wouldn't recommend just falling into a business, but you're probably already in it now. And so you probably come to it with a lot more of a, a structure and a process. And it's only been in the last year or so that I've joined an incubator that I've learned about startup models and, lean canvases and actually getting myself into a way I'm like, oh, wow, there's actually a much smarter way of doing this. But needless to say, I'm still here nearly 5 years later and things are going pretty well. So what I've learned, I should probably package up some way. So Good for the Hood is a social enterprise. We model our business. It's a business at the end of the day, for-purpose business, but we're designed as a social enterprise in the fact that we want to give back into community. We've got a for-purpose mission, and we donate some of our profits to climate projects and climate charities, and so we have wanted to work in that space between community, climate, environment, and I guess resilience and having more connected and more beautiful places to live. So it's all rosy in Jo's world. I can tell you it's not, but that's where I'd like to be. But we work primarily with local governments. So it's not always been that way. We often do work with corporates and businesses as well. But I really like working with local governments because they provide the essential services which our communities need. And they've also got a mandate to deliver programs and educate our community in a way that not many other people can. They reach people in their homes. They talk to people about their streets. And for me, that's a really powerful place to greet people. It's the place where we can meet the basic needs of people's lives. And we can also talk to them about their impact on the world as a citizen, as a human being. And that's a great unifier, even though there are, as Alison pointed out, huge discrepancies between privilege and all of those other things in our world. But we believe meeting people where they are at home is a great place, and talking about community is a way that we can cut through the division around climate, the division around environmental issues, and we can unify people around something they care about. And that's generally the places they live. People love where they live. Not many people hate being in Australia, not many people hate the communities they're in. Most people like to see that there's actually good there. So we use that lens to really frame environmental action, not as something that's a negative, but actually something that will amplify the good that's already there. And so our theory of change is that if we want people to become environmental leaders, which is what we'd love to see, because we believe that's how you reach those people who haven't yet got the message about the climate crisis or about the circular economy, we believe if we meet them where they are and take them on a journey, that we can activate them, whether they become entrepreneurs or whether they start a charity or whether they decide that, you know, they just want to run something in their community for a few years. We don't actually care, but we love the fact that we're working with people on very tangible local grassroots projects. So one of those has been this work about community hubs, this concept that the circular economy is coming. How do we translate that for people who live in communities? And what does that mean for the average person? Because most people know that when you talk about the circular economy, and maybe you're telling people about Boomerang Labs or the fact that you've been engaged in something in the circular economy, they look at you with this look of, what is that? And then you try and explain it, and it's incredibly complex, because not only you start talking about the fact that it's a universal, you know, global systems change, that still doesn't mean much to most people. So we like talking about place and places to examine what a circular economy can look like. And some of that is highly theoretical, because some of it's not here yet, obviously, and some of it is here, but it's imperfect. So we're often talking about this concept of what's happening overseas, what's in our community already, and what we think needs to happen. And I say think because we all know that there's a lot of testing and you know, unpacking that goes on in a new economic and global consumption model. So we are talking about this concept between global and local all the time. What needs to happen globally and what can and is happening locally. For most people, that means you end up talking about waste. Oh, sorry, I'm one slide behind, aren't I? There we are, catching up now. Most people, it means we talk about waste. We talk about the fact that, you know, it's talking about this byproduct of our consumption to date, and the fact that, you know, maybe there's something in that beautiful waste product that is actually resource rich and that has value and that we can apply some way. But we've got to get to a point, and I think we're starting to get there, where we're talking about so much more. And that's really tricky, particularly when you're working with local governments, because they're segmented around waste, around sustainability, around topics which apply services. And so when you're talking to community, they don't necessarily see that distinction, but we need to start having that conversation that circular economy is not just about waste as we see it, the stuff that goes to landfill. It's actually about water. It's actually about energy. It's actually about systems and flow of resources and materials in all ways, not just obviously the stuff we put in our bins. Everyone always talks about recycling, so often that's a great place to start. But as soon as you educate someone about recycling, more questions come up than answers. We start to understand that whilst we're great and passionate about recycling in Australia, it is such an imperfect system. And so we like starting there, but often by the time we've educated someone around recycling, people go, well, how does that work? You know, and how do we do that? So it is a great way to unlock people's awareness. I think we've got to get to a point where we start talking about climate and circularity as being one, and that climate action is a circular economy, and circular economy is the only way we will reach net zero in the timeframes that we need to. We know that we keep getting the alarm bells, we keep having the conversations. This concept of net zero and circular economies being separate are gone. Those two are absolutely inextricably linked, and we can't disconnect the two. So this conversation about how much we use and how much resources we're using up in Australia, for example, has to be linked to that climate conversation, and it has to be linked to that circular economy conversation. And when you start framing it in that way, it's a really compelling case for community, because they're starting to understand the need for climate action. and then giving them a pathway and understanding that it's so linked to the way we consume, not just energy or food, but stuff and things and resources. And that can really help resonate. So what I dance in is this weird space of systems change always when we work on any project, from a project we're currently working on at the University of Sydney with students around a circular economy hub, from a project that I was involved in with Hunters Hill Council, where we tried to set up a digital library space in a community which is mostly senior citizens in that place, which was really interesting and at times well received, at times not well received. Is this space between what can we do from the bottom up? What can we do when you don't always have positional authority or ability to change policy or even really shift the system? And actually how important having grassroots and community-based projects are to enable top-down structural change as well. And I feel like, it's great having really great reforms, but without those projects and examples in community, those reforms are sometimes unwelcome, or sometimes those reforms aren't seen as necessary. So I never think that, it's got to be policy first and community second. Everything that we work on when it comes to disruptive tech, innovation, systems change, it has to come back to the fact that it's a dance between testing and trying new things, whether that's in a business or in a community, and obviously responsive policy and reform, which sometimes we know is the only thing that's going to help make that change really work at scale. I've been lucky enough to work with Katie and Anna at different times through their work with New South Wales Circular and Circular Australia now on a project, which I will plug briefly because it has got some great resources that you might like to go back to. And we constantly came back to this sense of what does a circular economy need in Australia to work? If we want to adopt at scale new systems and new ways of doing it, can we do it through, just policy levers? Can we do it just through finance? And the constant conversation is that it requires so much action at so many levels. And this piece for citizens was always the hardest one. What does that mean? Are we just an afterthought? Are we the ones that, we just they will adapt because we're good at change? Or do they need to be part of that conversation? So the policy that we worked on, the piece of research that we worked on with New South Wales Circular at that point was around community hubs. And it was a way of exploring what that meant for citizens as part of a circular economy. And the first thing I'll say is that loud and clear through that conversation was this sense that if you keep calling us consumers, then you're really not letting us be anything else. Please, if you are talking about your customers or your clients or your residents, they are so much more than just consumers. In a circular economy, citizens or users or, whatever we want to call them, have a chance to be so much more. And that social good element that Alison talked about and that we know is a huge part of the work that charities and social enterprises have been doing for years in the circular economy space, don't get captured if we just call people consumers. So I like the word citizen because to me, citizen shows a lack, is an absolute capacity for actually disrupting and advocating and for change as well. But I would think if you are treating the person that you're designing a product or service for as just someone who's going to use that thing up, then you're not looking at them in a way that's going to give you a real concept of their capacity for other things as well. So when we're talking about this concept of what a community hub is, it's a place-based approach for the circular economy. It's a place that is a physical entity or a digital entity. It is a way that people with a shared commonality can come together, but it's also a localized version of that. In the truest sense, it uses place-based approaches to have some governance and agreement and input into a service or a co-created thing that serves the community as much as the community serves it. So often we set up these duplicated sort of McDonald's-like services and we go, well, this will work. And what came out of the research we did with UTS, with the Design Innovation Research Centre, and all of the community and charity groups and people in research that came and participated in this research project, was that if you don't let us have a say in this, it's not going to work for us. You're designing something that's going to fail. And so we have packaged up the research that was done there. It was done through COVID, which was really tricky. But I just want to touch on a couple of quick things from the research, which will give you a flavour of everything that's there. And maybe we can send the link over as well. So firstly, the constant conversation was, well, who is the community in these spaces? Who are coming back to return or drop off or repair or collect or, exchange or chat or learn? And what do they want and how do we reach them? And it became really obvious that there's no one size fits all model. And in fact, in our communities, as we look at it now, there are so many examples of sometimes imperfect, but certainly long-standing and new models of community hubs. So they are built on a foundation of being, supported by government, supported and sustained by funding somehow. They're generally nice places to be. No one likes to go and hang out at the tip shop every day. I know it can be fun, but at the same time, these are places that people want to be. And generally, they have some kind of partnership or community-owned element, whether that's a fully or partially, but there is an element of control there that enables them to do that. So we actually mocked up some hypothetical, which are based on reality, community hubs, and I'll run through those quickly. Examples of community hubs that you might see, things like tool libraries, community gardens. We see all sorts of incarnations of those across Australia, regionally, metropolitan. We see mobile hubs, which are particularly great for university populations, migrant communities, people without access to adequate transport, regional and remote communities, places where it makes no sense to have one established hub, but something that can drop into communities at different times should work better. We know that digital spaces, things, libraries, swap, share models, product as a service systems, and increasingly useful in the community hub space. Repair and retail hubs, which we see pop up various ways, like red cycles, now sort of non-existent, but maybe again, a model of dropping things back to a retail precinct is an example. And experimental or micro factory hubs, we're definitely seeing those as well. So when we came to it, the community said, the one thing you need to know for us is that circular economy, you can talk about all the economic systems and models you like, but for us, it's about care. This comes back to the fact that when you care about country, whether that's the environment or whether it's a more holistic system, and you care about the things, the places we live and the people in those places, that's what the circular economy is. Don't try and overcomplicate it with anything else. And so as a startup or someone who's working in a policy space or in community, I would say that your opportunity is to think about co-locating services in proximity with others so that a community hub model may make more sense as we're trying to adopt new tech or new systems. Innovate around existing hubs, support those that are already there, help solve some of the really complicated risk, insurance, supply chain infrastructure and financing challenges that hubs have, just like any startup. It's murky waters for a lot of these places and it's often uncertain. Stop calling us consumers in the face of all the opportunities that a new systems change can offer. There's so much that community can be there as partners. And to be honest, the community is absolutely ready for a systems change. So let's bring it on.
Sorry, I should take myself off mute. That might help. Thanks so much, Jo. Really appreciate you giving us that presentation. I think that gives us a really nice, really complements what Alison was talking about already in terms of different aspects of how the community needs to be engaged in circular economy. We have had a few questions come through, but please, by all means, people add more questions or put your hand up through the little I mean, physically you can, but I might not see it. So put it through the little emoji that comes up. So I guess I'll go through those questions just briefly while we see more. But Alison, the question came up about how your funding model goes. And I guess, Jo, it may be something you want to touch on too, because I think there's also this thought that community-led organisations are harder to get money out of it. At the end of the day, as much as we do this for our heart and for our community's sense, it does need to pay for our own personal bills too. So really interesting to hear your perspectives on funding models, and maybe that could be also giving guidance for people interested in, getting involved in or starting startups that are community oriented, and how they can still make a living whilst doing good through their work.
Yeah, I'd say it is tough. Starting a charity is always hard. So the first thing I'd always say, if you're thinking of starting a charity, is make sure that you're not replicating that's something that already exists in the market, and see if you could collaborate with somebody before you start your own. And that's why I looked to see whether there was something like Good 360 that did exist. We didn't, so that's why I started Good 360. And then it's looking for the different types of funding sources. And then have a diverse funding model. Don't rely on just one funding source, because in COVID, as many businesses, if you've got one funding source, you'll soon find that dry up. So we are funded by various funding sources, and so it's from grants, which are philanthropic and corporate. We have a fee for service, and then we do fundraising as well. The area that we haven't had much luck in is actually government funding, and so we're sort of looking to do that. And the challenge with that is that because we're doing something that hasn't been done before, pioneering something is really difficult. So, if you're as an entrepreneur trying to pioneer something that doesn't exist in the market, you need to be tenacious and resilient, because the reason we don't fit neatly in government buckets means that, they have to change constitutions, or they're not used to funding that, because the grants are just not written for us. So in the waste sector, it's like they fund food and organics or single plastic bags. So we're not eligible to write for those grants. So it's a long way to have to change policy. So I think if you're starting a model, have a look, see if you fit neatly somewhere, and sort of try to find funding in that pool. If you have to pioneer something, I can tell you there's been a lot of nights rocking in a corner saying, am I doing the right thing? But the one thing that drives us is our purpose, is back to the fact that, there's a whole heap of product that needs to be facilitated. And we're tenacious enough to keep knocking on doors and arguing with people that they do need to fund this. And if you're tenacious to do that and you're going to stick by your guns, please do it, because the world has to change if you've got a product that needs changing.
Yeah, I'll just add, there's a reason I didn't start a charity. And first of all, is one, because I'd never run a business before. And I think that there's a lot of similarities, but charities have the additional complexities of, additional governance requirements, and also it's just damn hard work. Like if you've got to really know what Alison said, you really know your market, you've got to, which is what businesses need to do. But for me, it felt like I didn't want to, it felt like the failure would be enhanced if I did that. And I've seen a lot of friends at a similar sort of time do that. And I know that, it's particularly challenging in the not-for-profit sector. I will say that as a small business and as a social enterprise, I've set myself up to not rely on grant funding. Yes, at different times that's helped, but often I'm not actually eligible for a lot of grants anyway now, because I'm set up as a proprietary entity, and that's just not what grants are required. I have been able to partner with a lot of not-for-profits at different times if a grant has been appropriate, so that has worked really well. But grants are generally not set up to they're great to testing to do some great research, test a new product, test something in the market, but they're not going to set your business up to, in my book, to scale in the way. So it's about using them wisely. And I think I've also think that if you understand your market well enough, and the opportunities, and as Alison said, understanding the funding that was available from councils, knowing what levies were funding, what can be paid for under those, where the biggest service that you can offer is, that's how we've been able to actually have some success. And and also collaborating with others all the time, like small organizations working with others and just really knowing your worth and sort of being able to leverage and work with those quite effectively. We've worked with state government. We've worked with, I did some work recently with a multinational high-end brand. And, you know, it's a bit like your Sam Neill moment. Alison, I was like, wow, that, you know, little old me is doing this with these guys. But, you know, so it's actually just backing yourself sometimes. And look, if we didn't like risk, we wouldn't be doing this, would we? So if I wanted a normal 9 to 5, I'd still be doing what I was doing before. So we are maniacs, and I kind of like that.
Yeah. And I think collaboration is the key word. Like, that's one of our values, is I think right at the beginning is know your purpose, know your values, and stick to them, and don't divert from that.
I think that leads really well in. I'm amalgamating some of the questions in the chat so we can get through as much, as well as putting my own little spin in there. So, you know, touching on that idea of collaboration being key and needing to partner with organisations, often the people you need to partner with to make more impact are people that don't necessarily see the potential that you do through circular economy. You know, often circular economy is dismissed as a green movement, or it's dismissed as a, you know, a fad or a fad, you know, in terms of just a new way of thinking, which obviously it is so much more than that, and it's got so much more benefit. So I guess my question is, what's the appetite from business? Are you seeing growth from organizations? Are you still having to really tell them and communicate that to them? And how do you make sure that they don't put you aside as, you know, ticking a box for ESG, but actually understanding that it comes with inherent benefits for them, as well as supporting the cause?
So would you like me to start? So I suppose because I've been on this journey such a long time, like I said, 10 years ago when I first thought about the Good 360 model, circular economy just wasn't in the, you know, the vernacular. So when we were knocking on the door of businesses, it was about them trying to get rid of their problem. And I think the really interesting thing for me is, like, who were we talking to in the business? So initially it was sort of the inventory people, the stock controllers, the people who had the issue. Now the people we're talking to in the business is the head of sustainability. So it's a different person. Or we might have been talking to the CFO because they were trying to figure out, you know, how could they do it at the least cost and where was the cost benefit for them. Now the people who are contacting us is the head of sustainability. That role didn't exist 10 years ago. And if you look now on Seeker, you know, I asked you to go and search that role. They're the people who are getting hired for most of the businesses. They're the most sought out people. So I think, you know, 2 or 3 years ago, businesses have realized that their citizens, not their consumers, their citizens, I'm listening, their citizens are now demanding that of them. But what we were telling them was that their team were demanding it of them. So when you start to recruit, and we were selling this story to them 5 years ago, is that the people you hire will want you to do the right thing. And then your citizens will also want you to do the right thing. So we've been saying this mandate for 10 years. So you can't get good employees unless you do the right thing, and then your customers will buy and demand at the checkout. So I think, you know, that wave has come, and we were saying that 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and now they've woken up and they're hiring people, and they're now knocking on our door saying, hang on, I have a KPI and I have to meet my KPI. How do you make me look good? Solve my problem for me. And that's now going in their annual reports, on their websites, etc. So there's been this whole flipping of that. So, and I think that'll be massive in the next 5 years. And that's just not what we do. That's across their business. We're one tiny section, tiny bit of what their job is.
Jo, did you have anything to add?
Well, probably not. I can't even remember what the question was now. I feel like I got so involved in Alison's response, and I'm just like, so probably not to that one, unless you've got something else you want to follow up.
I'd be saying, if anyone's looking to requalify, or anybody's got people thinking about what they need to do when they're leaving school, university, I'm going, go down that path. Circular economy, head of sustainability, all those types of role is the new wave of, you know, you will never be out of a job.
Comforting for us all, I think, to be at all stages of the career, you know, that we are on the right path. We're not crazy. Maybe a little bit, but I think to wrap up, I'm going to just speak about the fact that councils are a huge connector between, you know, community oriented organisations, industry partners that you need. And I guess we have a lot of councils on board on today, and we have some questions coming through. So I think really like to touch on, maybe I can go to you first, Jo, is the role of council, how they can connect you and how they can enable, or how you found that they're enabling this sort of innovation, and also invite any council people to put their hand up, and I can throw you to the screen if you're feeling brave as well, to talk about how you feel that you have a place in enabling circular.
Yeah, I think Katie, councils are like this amazing space where they can, get feedback back from the community really quickly. They can strategize reasonably quickly and deliver projects quickly, which there's not many levels of government where you can have that immediate sort of response to what you're doing. And so it's very powerful. And, I don't know how many people who work in council feel like they're agile, but they are probably the most agile level of government, because they have to respond quickly. They have to, I thought I had an interjector, but I think it was just, so yeah, it's a really great space to do things, because you can try projects, you can pilot things, you can test things. Especially with community, you've got this amazing community resource, where you often have people knocking down your door saying, we want to do this thing, let us do this thing. And often, it's this dance between, well, we'd love to, but, don't sue us, or don't, kill someone. It's this space of like, you've actually got a lot of people in communities wanting to do more. So I guess it is a really challenging, but also exciting space, because there's so many projects that can be delivered in a way that, a long-term state-based plan or federal policy plan just can't do it that quickly. So I think I'm seeing a lot of councils doing a lot in the education space. They're doing a lot across different aspects of place-based precinct design, and they've got the open space, really great. It's just sometimes the challenge for councils is working across those departments, because it is, having been in one at different points, it has been quite siloed. So I like to dance between a lot of those things, and I think that's probably the biggest challenge. So sometimes we can help because we bring in different people from different departments and see opportunities. So we work in consulting projects, but also obviously do a lot of education projects as well.
Thanks, Jo. Alison, I know you mentioned in the chat that you Good 360 is open to working with charities. So did you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, no, we love working with councils, and I think COVID was the biggest area that we really scaled up with councils, because I think they were in a situation that their communities really needed them. And we're based in Western Sydney, so they had some of the harshest lockdowns. So we were really working with them where there was a real gap. So you could see these Western Sydney communities needed access to hand sanitizer, face masks. These were all mandated, but often these communities just didn't have the funds for that. So the local councils were reaching out to see if we could help. So they were sort of funded to do food, but they didn't have access to all these really other essential goods. And what we found was that the grassroots community organisations in those areas, the churches, the neighbourhood centres, they were still running to make sure that their communities could work, and the councils were helping us facilitate that to their grassroots organisations, where some of the bigger charities actually had pulled out because their staff couldn't work. Everybody was mandated to work from home, but that didn't help the communities. So we worked with the councils, we worked with the grassroots organisations who were still helping to feed and work with those organisations. So I think the council has, as you said, has their pulse into the local communities. And I think that's where we play a role to say, what does the council need? How do we work with the local communities, and especially those really grassroots community organisations who have lack of funding, but need access into their communities, especially in multicultural sort of areas that they were really left behind in COVID. So, we really worked with councils to facilitate what they needed when they were getting left behind. We stood with them. Councils were really, and as you said, they were very nimble. They might not have thought they were nimble, but they were the ones who were hearing the stories and needed to react. We reacted with them, and the churches, etc., made things happen when times were the toughest. And that still happens, the same responses, whether it's a disaster, that local council on the ground is still operating when everything else doesn't operate. So that's why we really like to work with the council, because they have the pulse what's happening in their community.
Great. Thank you so much, Alison and Jo, for joining today. We'll have to wrap up now because that hour went very quickly, but really appreciate your time and everyone for joining. We'll be sharing the recording from today as well as the email addresses, both of our lovely speakers. As I've said, they're really keen to talk to you if you have any questions. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your day before the public holiday.